Wild Health is about optimizing you. We use genomics, blood work, biometrics, microbiome assessment, many other tests, and a conversation with you to come up with a full health optimization plan. What's the perfect diet, exercise, and supplement plan for you and only you? The Wild Health podcast is about optimizing all of us. Here we cover the cutting-edge science that gives you the base to be able to apply the personalized plan we give you as a patient. To sign up as a patient, go to wildhealth.com. Or if you're a physician or health coach and you want to learn how to do this for your patients, we're happy to help as well. Wildhealth.com for all the information on becoming a patient or working with us. Hey, a quick note about this podcast you're about to hear is from one of our summits. Now, I know you couldn't make it, but that's all right. We think it's good stuff and we wanted to share it. Hope you enjoy. Couldn't get any better. There's not really usually any takers on that. It seems like it's always such a natural thing, but always a struggle. And I think it has to do with our environment, just like we were talking about the food earlier. I really enjoyed the conversation earlier, and I'm hoping this goes the same way. Maybe just to kind of kick things off, unless you have a plan, we could do the kind of Pareto thing again, just talk about top tips for how you think about sleep in general, and then dive into specifics.
Yeah,
folks.
Sure. I like it.
Sounds good.
Mike, you want to give your top three, and then I can tear them apart and tell them you're wrong.
Sure. I don't know if I have a top three.
Top seven.
Maybe I'll just talk about like sleep hygiene in general. I think that's obviously the first place to start is what are you doing before you go to bed? And then what's your environment like in bed, right? There are definitely some things that you want to try to avoid as much as you can right before bedtime. Like, for example, watching a screen, blue light. Blue light's going to reduce the production of melatonin and make it harder for you to fall asleep. Stressful TV. So watching anything stressful on Netflix or anything like that for, a solid hour before you go to bed is going to increase cortisol and make it harder for you to sleep. So being mindful of what you're doing before you go to bed, and then developing some sort of routine so that you can start to trick your mind into realizing sleep is coming, right? That routine can be as simple as, a warm shower followed by some journaling and reading in your bed. It can be way more complex, and I've heard all kinds of different routines that seem to work for people. Generally, people seem to think that sort of cooling yourself off, getting the temperature down so that you can fall asleep is very beneficial. So I have a lot of clients that take warm showers and then get into their bed. I do also have people who take like cold plunges right before they go to bed. So it's really all over the place, but it seems to be cooling yourself down gets you to sleep better. And then environment while you're sleeping. I think we live in a world where everything has a freaking light on it these days. Like there's a light on your fire alarm, there's a light on your TV, there's a light on your, alarm clock. Like everywhere you look, there's a light. So when you lay down to go to bed, all of a sudden you open your eyes after a few minutes, and you realize there's just lights all throughout the room. That's not how we were created to sleep. We were created to sleep in darkness. So trying to minimize light exposure while you're sleeping is going to help reduce awakenings. It's going to allow you to go back to sleep easier if you do wake up. And then keeping it cool in the room that you're sleeping in can be very beneficial as well. I think I did like 10, so I'll stop there.
That was a lot.
And I think there's 100 like things we could talk about. We could talk about different supplements and glycine or different medications and all these things. I generally, when I'm talking to a patient, I generally try to paint just a quick picture, because it's easier, I think, for me to understand or remember and for others. And so as I'm hearing Mike talk about this, it reminds me of how I describe it. And I just say, hey, I think we should think about sleep from kind of an evolutionary lens or an ancestral lens, and just think about what it was like 1,000 years ago. If you can get as close to that as possible, then you kind of fix all of these problems, a lot of the things that Mike mentioned. So you think about a caveman or a cavewoman sleeping in a cave. It's cool. Like Mike said, it's like in the 60s. It's dark. There's no artificial lights. There's no blue lights or artificial lights kind of going into bed. It's quiet. There's not ambient noises like we have, or there's like white noise, like a stream running. And there's a routine to it. Like they're going to bed at it's getting dark and they're going to bed at the same time, the time that they're going to sleep. It's called midnight because should be kind of the middle of the night, not the beginning of the night. and the time they wake up is the same. It's with the sun. So if you can just think about that, then all of these things kind of make sense and fall into place. And then we can obviously talk about how to fight all
And
of
then
that.
you got to sleep on rocks like a caveman. There's like dust and stuff.
Yeah. And that works really
mice.
well when you're doing shift work. Just go to bed at
Yeah,
the same time every night.
Yeah,
Don't worry.
the funny thing is, normally when I'm talking to a patient, I start off with like all the statistics about how critical sleep is, the increased rates of cancer and mood disorders and mortality. I don't want to go over any of that with shift workers because it's just depressing.
Terrifying.
Yeah,
it's
so
just terrifying.
it is difficult as a shift worker.
I mean, you guys hit a bunch of the big ones. I'll just toss in a few extra, and then maybe we can talk about questions and sort of how you actually make this work in the life of someone working shifts, because we've all had to deal with that. Don't eat close to before bed. That was a nutritional advice earlier around sort of glucose insulin metabolism and just metabolic health. But if you eat a big meal before you go to bed, that's going to disrupt your sleep. Alcohol is if you've ever worn a sleep tracker of any kind, even like an Apple Watch, go see what your heart rate does overnight or your HRV. If you've had a glass of wine or 2 glasses of wine before bed, it's real kryptonite for your sleep. We talked a bit about caffeine metabolism. I think that's actually one place where genomics really do help. Is there are folks with Adora 2A or CYP SNPs who really need to either just give up coffee altogether or stop drinking caffeine by like 10 in the morning, because there's actually like a lot of active caffeine still in your system when you're going to bed otherwise. Getting out and getting early morning sun exposure. I think the interesting thing is like setting our circadian rhythm. We need a lot of light in the morning, like 20 to 40 minutes of light hitting your retina. It doesn't need to be like, don't go staring at the sun, but like no sunglasses. It can be cloudy. It doesn't matter, but like real light to trigger and tell your body this is daytime. And then by the time it gets into the late afternoon, you want to be getting as little light as possible. So totally agree, screens off. If you can turn lights down in your house, if you can actually just make it kind of caveman like by the time it's 4 or 5 p.m. and just get by with less light, you're going to sleep a lot better. I don't think I have other like broad.
I think one thing I would say, just to sort of echo what we said earlier, is if sleep is an issue for you, then prioritizing it is important, right? And one of the best ways to prioritize it is to start tracking it. Getting a sleep tracker is going to start to give you insight into what does and does not work for you. And it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. Sure, there's some genetics that might help inform things or whatever, but in reality, the way you respond to your environment is going to be unique and different to you. And the best way to figure that out is by getting direct feedback on a daily basis as to how did I sleep last night? What did I do last night? Oh, I watched, 7 episodes of The Wire and, then I slept like crap for the night. Like that sort of like regular feedback is what it takes to start to develop these habits that are going to lead to improved sleep. So I think just like thinking about a sleep tracker, like a Oura Ring or a Whoop device or an Apple Watch, or, there's a jillion different things out there that does it, everything, can be really helpful and informative. Can I ask a question? How many people in here are shift workers? Cool. So maybe we should talk about shift work and sleep.
Yeah, probably.
Matt said something earlier that I take issue with, and that's like he was concerned about giving you the data on what it means to be a sleep worker and the risk of mortality and cancer and cardiovascular disease and all those things associated with sleep work. And
If they can't handle it, don't do it.
yeah, I think that's silly. Like you got to know what you got yourself into, and I don't think that it's one of those things where you can't prevent something. I think that there's a wealth of opportunity, and knowing what those opportunities are, how you can fight back against that increased risk that we all have from working shifts, I think is super important. So maybe we should talk about that. Mike, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to build on that, we're not currently working shifts, but we probably have 40 years of collective shift work experience. So we've done our sleep damage to ourselves already. So we're not immune. So I don't think we need to put our heads in the sand about it. It's terrible. If you really want to learn about how terrible it is, just like literally go to PubMed and look up sleep disturbance and chronic illness, or sleep deprivation, or shift work and chronic illness and sleep. and, you know, increased rates of cancer, cardiovascular disease, dementia, diabetes. Like there's nothing good about depriving sleep. It's probably just as bad for you as smoking or loneliness or any of the other things that we've talked about. So it's really about just playing defense and trying to optimize what you can. So, I mean, I'd love to hear some strategies from people who have been working shifts for a while about what has worked for you in terms of optimizing sleep. Is it, number one, is it a big priority, or do you just write it off? Like, I'm working nights this week and it's going to be terrible. Be interested in people's experience.
Everybody sleeps great.
Yeah, apparently everybody's doing awesome. That's great.
Yeah, you just knowing that there's going to be no willpower when you get home and designing that. One time I got off a shift at like 3 a.m. And I went through the Taco Bell drive-through, and I don't remember what I ordered, but they gave me like my order, and I don't know how many people were behind me that they gave this big bag, and I didn't realize it until I got home. And I remember I'm very embarrassed and ashamed of this, getting to the garage, having a couple bourbons, and then eating like 4 people's worth of Taco Bell in the garage before I went inside, and then just the shame.
How deep was the shame deep enough that you threw out the wrappers in the garage garbage?
No,
or you
I
took
burnt them in a fire. Yeah. So just burnt it.
My theory is that a lot of the research about sleep loss with shift work is confounded by dietary changes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that who here makes great decisions at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're on shift and somebody brings in a bag of Oreos? Yeah. Like, we make terrible decisions. It's the middle of the night. You feel bad about yourself. You're like, I'm here working. Like, you know, I at least deserve these 12 Oreos and these, you know, this 2 slices of pizza and 3 Pepsis. Like, we make bad decisions, and you see it in the other colleagues that work in night shifts too. Like, nobody brings in healthy food on night shifts. It's always crap. It's always junk. It's always leftover candy from Halloween. It's always cookies, right? So not only are we making bad decisions, but we're also eating at a time when our body is not actually primed to eat, right? Unless you're completely flipped, right? Unless you're doing, you know, a week or a month of shifts in a row and you've completely flipped your circadian rhythm, like, your body doesn't expect to get food right now. There's actually melatonin receptors on the islet cells of your pancreas that help deliver insulin to your body whenever you eat food, or that prevent your islet cells from working as well, so you don't deliver as much insulin and you actually create insulin resistance at night. So if you're eating at 2 o'clock in the morning when your body doesn't think you should be eating, you have a different response to that meal than if you had that meal at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So one thing that I tried to do, and sometimes I was good at this, sometimes it was just too damn hard, but I tried to mimic my diet independent of what my shift work was. So, like, when I was working an overnight shift, I did not eat in my overnight shift. And I'd have, like, sometimes I'd have breakfast. Usually I didn't eat breakfast because I just time restrict eat anyway. So I just go home and go to sleep. And, you know, you feel a little hungry when you're going to sleep, but you actually sleep a lot better because your body's not trying to digest while you're sleeping, right? Same principle for you know, a swing shift, right? I, like, at 5 or 6 p.m. when I normally eat dinner with the family, I could eat my dinner at that time on my shift, right? Or sometimes I'd eat before I go into shift and then just not eat for the rest of the night and then go home, go to bed. And for me, at least, and, you know, everybody's got to play around this for themselves, but that really seemed to help regulate me a little bit more. And it seemed to not disrupt my sleep quite as much, and allowed me to sleep after that overnight a little bit easier, and then flip back into a normal schedule if I'm doing a one-off.
2 other night shift hacks that or techniques, I guess, that worked for me significantly. One was I used to drink a big cup of coffee, go into the night shift, and then bring a thermos of coffee and just kind of sip on that through the night shift. And I made the transition to just drinking 2 cups of coffee and going into the shift and not having any more caffeine over the rest of the shift. That actually made a big difference in my ability to go home and go to bed. And it's amazing how we, like, rationalize. I was like, oh, it was just a busy shift and it was hectic, and that's why I can't go to sleep. My mind's active. And then as soon as I stopped drinking coffee during my shift, I would get home. It didn't matter how bad the night shift was. I just went to bed. You just reminded me of another one. And, like, coffee was one.
I'll say one thing while you're thinking about that. The problem with that is then the patient that comes in at 5:30 in the morning and who needs you to be thinking critically. And how I solve that problem for myself, at least, is
Burpees.
no, that's a good idea too.
Breath work.
Actually, that's a great idea, actually.
Yeah.
But another way is just understanding the pharmacokinetics of these molecules that we use. Like caffeine, it has a 6-hour half-life if you metabolize it fast, maybe 12 or slower. So drinking it just at the beginning of the shift. And then what I would use at 4 a.m. if I'm really down and need it is actually some nicotine. Nicotine has a half-life of 1 to 2 hours. If you're not getting into a cigarette, you're not actually getting a lot of the bad. Nicotine is a pretty good thing for your mind and for learning and for keeping and for alertness. It has more positive and negative effects if you're not getting in that horrible delivery mechanism. So that was something that kept me alert in those last several hours, but didn't prevent sleep the next morning as well.
Or just like, there's somebody dying in front of you. So cortisol naturally runs through your system and you wake up. Like, when I stopped drinking coffee for night shifts, I found I didn't have any trouble actually just being awake when I needed to be, because
it's not the cold. Scary. It was the old patient with abdominal pain.
Sure. That you should be signing out to your partner anyway.
Sunglasses on the way home. I don't know if anybody already does this, but in the same way that we're light receptive, I was like the Terminator when I would leave a night shift, like wrap around shades on in the department before I walked out. And then just on the whole way until bed, where I've got the blackout curtains in the cave. But I found that really useful too.
Yeah, we can talk about supplements. The magnesium L-threonate is a great one for the brain. I take glycine every night as well. Depending on my stress levels and loads, I may or may not do ashwagandha sometimes at night. I don't do that frequently. Also, reishi seems to have some good calming effects at night as a natural thing. And then we can get into the little more harder substances if anybody wants to talk about.
There's a couple more. There's some studies on L-threonine and GABA, which is not like the neurotransmitter GABA, but it's very similar. There's some studies showing increased deep sleep with those. Melatonin has got some great data behind it. But I'll tell you, like, in just working with patients using melatonin, you get a very varied response. Some people seem to get like nighttime awakenings with it. It's like you get a big bolus and then the bolus goes away and they get awakening. I've noticed that seems to be worse with higher doses. So maybe there's like a smaller dose that seems to help better, like 500 milligrams.
People often take melatonin like right before bed too, which is not the way you're supposed to take it. So really like 2 hours before sleep, before you plan to go to sleep. That's something that I still see patients coming to me going, yeah, I take 3 milligrams of melatonin before bed. That's my sleep routine. And you can cut them down to 0.5 or 1 and put it a couple hours earlier. It tends to improve their sleep.
And you can be a little bit more meticulous about these too. Like each one of these supplements tend to affect the sleep cycle in different ways. And people's insomnia is usually not like overall insomnia. People often have latency issues where they have trouble falling asleep, or they have nighttime awakenings, or they have trouble staying asleep. So like melatonin is not going to help you with nighttime awakenings usually, because unless you're taking like extended release, because whatever you take in is running out of your system fairly quickly, right? Just like you don't need melatonin if you're falling asleep quickly, like that. It's sleep onset, right? So then if you're having nighttime awakenings, then you might want to think about something like L-threonine or magnesium could be helpful, which can also help with sleep onset. So also like getting down to like, what is the problem with my sleep, right? Is it just falling asleep or is it staying asleep? And then sort of like guide your supplements in that direction. So this is probably the hardest thing to fix when it comes to sleep. But we'll typically focus on things that are going to improve your parasympathetic tone, like meditation, breath work, reducing overall stress. So things to look at are, like sleep hygiene again. What am I doing before bed? Am I elevating my cortisol by watching, intense TV? Am I watching too much television? Am I getting in arguments? Do I have like a good bedtime routine? Or is it just because you're getting off shift and you're stressed from being on shift? Are you doing an appropriate wind down routine after your shift before you jump straight into bed? Like those are the things I would look at first. Medications and supplements are not as good for nighttime awakenings. Even the prescription ones aren't as good.
There are a couple though. And one thing before I talk about that is frequently what has helped some patients I've had is having a notepad and a pen beside the bed when they have one of those awakenings. Frequently, for those of us that are busy, our brain's solving problems still from the day and just needs to get something out, and just getting that out quickly and then try and go back to sleep is sometimes a good technique. Phosphatidylserine can be helpful to decrease those cortisol spikes at night. So you hate to like get reliant on any substance or feel like you need it. But if it's occasionally happening frequently, like for me, like at the beginning of COVID or just other time, just certain situations and very stressful periods of my life, waking up like that, I find it to be a useful short-term tool. And that's just an over-the-counter supplement. For me, that is the time when I would use melatonin. I don't like thinking about it, using it like routinely to help with onset, but to try to reset the system, I'd use that and it was helpful. Also, Mike was talking about food timing, focusing early ahead of time on making sure the food timing is correct. That can help. And I'm talking a little bit about, that's a similar situation to jet lag and how we approach jet lag as well. But being proactive with the food timing, maybe the melatonin reset, the light that Mike was mentioning, being very specific about that. And then, yeah, building some sleep debt, like you talked about, like not sleeping before, like letting that sleep debt build up and the adenosine build up can be helpful in those situations.
Some people have success with doing meditations in the middle of the night if they wake up. Yeah, they'll do a quick meditation, body scan, or I've heard lots of different versions. But
I think sometimes some reframing of those waking ups can be very helpful too. I talk to patients sometimes about, hey, when you do wake up in the middle of the night and you're frustrated about that or can't go back to sleep, that's stimulating in itself and you get in this cycle. So instead, like realize like I am so busy, and I have been meaning to and wanting to meditate more forever now, and I just am never getting around to it. I'm so thankful like I have this time right now where I can meditate. I basically have an unlimited amount of time to meditate, and I'm going to start right now. Let me see how long I can meditate. I'm going to really crush this meditation right now and go into that, and that kind of psychological trick can be very helpful.
Loving kindness can sort of meet that critic a little bit and shut them up to some extent, help you go to sleep.
Or maybe when you wake up too, it's a good time for it. If you're too tired at night, if you get to do it and wake up, oh, we got another opportunity for gratefulness and for meditation.
You know, we just recorded a podcast that we haven't put out yet on Yoga Nidra. Just to get to your point, if you're not familiar with Yoga Nidra meditation, it's a nighttime meditation where you're lying on your back, sort of in Shavasana, like the end of yoga, where that's my favorite yoga position, just lay down. And if you fall asleep during Yoga Nidra, that's fine. Like there's no pressure. And the whole thing can be anywhere from 15 to 25, 30 minutes. So to have something you can do in the middle of the night too, I've definitely used it when I've had nighttime awakenings, and as opposed to Yoga Nidra before bed, where I usually finish it and then fall asleep, I always fall asleep during Yoga Nidra when I wake up in the middle of the night. Hey, Mike, which is the most important pillar of health?
We like to joke about like what the most important pillar is. That's why Mike just asked me that question. I think that I was going to say something. I was
just going to a simple thing. It's the volume of that food. I mean, if you just work out, your body's primed to dispose of that glucose, and you need that nutrition. So I wouldn't necessarily skip that, but it's just the volume and the quality.
Eat something different. Like, you could always have a larger snack before the gym, and then post gym have protein shake. I mean, your body's going to digest that relatively quickly. Like don't go like, hammer like a Big Mac or like, like a bunch of like a bowl of pasta or something like that. It's going to take forever, but like, try to eat something that's relatively quick. And see if you can hack the system so that you get the best of both worlds. I mean, the exercise is probably still going to interfere a little bit with your sleep, but I mean, that exercise in that community is probably way more important than the sleep. Now, if it's an everyday thing and like you're constantly, creating sleep debt, then you might want to think about like, how can I get both of these things? Like, or can I do this a few days a week and then, optimize sleep the other days of the week, or can I catch up on the weekends? Or that's where you can kind of like think about how you can work around it. Also, training metabolic flexibility in general could potentially help with that. So the more your body gets used to utilizing fat as an energy source as opposed to carbohydrates, the less like ups and downs you get and the less hunger you get. So that metabolic flexibility that you train during the day will actually benefit you at night, because when your carbohydrate load from dinner drops down, right, you get the natural drop of your blood glucose. You won't get as much of it. And also if you've got fat in the meal. So just being more mindful about not like hammering carbs all the time and having periods of your day or multiple days in a row, even where you're lower carb, could create more metabolic flexibility so that you don't get that at night.
The last thing I'd add, and that was happening to me when I was training for Ironman races, just a simple matter of not getting enough calories. But it sounds like you've already thought about that. Sometimes our bodies confuse thirst for hunger as well. And so it may just be one simple thing is just try a warm glass of water to get the volume in the stomach, and then you're not potentially thirsty, and then maybe that could be instead of real hunger.
Then just get up and pee instead of eat.
Well, depending on what time it is, if he's actually dehydrated, he's going to be fine. So, we've been sitting a long time. Let's do the movement break unless anybody has any last pressing questions. And then during the movement break, we'll move, or if you want to take a quick restroom break, that's great. You can do that as well. We're going to, in about 15 minutes, we'll start the last kind of talk before the wrap up in the evening. How long is the movement? What are you going to do, Julie? Like 10 minutes? Okay, great. So 10 minutes, and then you get a little bit of time for the restroom as well. But 5:40, we're going to start back in here in 15 minutes. But let's do the movement together. Okay. Just dancing.
Thanks so much for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you want more daily health education, be sure to follow us on Instagram, which is filled with health optimization how-tos, grocery shopping lists, guided breathwork posts, myth debunking, and so much more. You can find us at Wild Health MD on Instagram.